Good evening. Welcome to another hopefully interesting show on Activate Worcester. We have a guest tonight that's going to be talking about something that a lot of people really don't have a heck of a lot of information on, and they should. And it's something called Agenda 21. And rather than my going on and on at this point, I'd like my co-host, Mr. Pinto, to get right into it and introduce Mr. David.
Wow, I was hoping we'd get another one of those fine editorial minutes out of you, sir.
Only when the mood strikes me.
Okay.
And it isn't striking me right now, so we'll have to wait for next.
Okay. So I'm going to tell a little story about this gentleman
Please
before I go over his credentials and you know, explain who he is and what he's done to be an active citizen. This is Dave Kopaz. He's from out in the western part of the state. Well, my little story goes like this. We were at a meeting one day, and Dave has a TV show like we do here. It's called Red Pill Politics. He actually takes his show on the road. He's a little more sophisticated than we are. And he's talking about how if you have issues that you want to get people to know about the issues, go to your local cable station and take the classes and start a show. And he's given this speech, and I'm standing behind my good friend Ron here, and he's saying, you should get a cable TV show. And I'm smacking Ron. I'm going, yeah, come on, boy, here we go. You know, yeah, mule, let's go. And he's saying how much benefit it is to have a cable TV show and everything. And every time he's talking about how great it is, I'm giving Ron a smack up the backside of the head, saying, we got to do it, Ron, we got to do it. Listen to what this guy is saying. He's right. He's absolutely right. So if you like this show, this guy we have on tonight was the inspiration. He's the guy that lit the fire under our butts and said, get yourself a cable TV show and talk about what you want to talk about. And of course, our issue is telling people to get off the couch and get active in whatever issues are important to you. So let me thank you so much, sir, for giving us the inspiration and giving me an opportunity to smack him in the back of the head. It's always
without fear of reprisal.
Yes. Well, I was behind you, so you couldn't swing back. So this guy's involved in a lot of things. So let's run down a little bit of his credentials and what he cares about, and then we'll let him do the talking. We'll sit back and do what we do best, shut our mouths and let our guests be the stars.
Amen. Yeah.
All right. So like I said, Dave is from out in the Ware-Belchertown area. He's a native of that area. He's the president of the Massachusetts Republican Assembly, and he was elected as a delegate to the 2008 and 2012 RNC conventions. His municipal service involves quite a few things. He's a town conservation agent out in Ware. He's the Conservation Commission chair. He's the Open Space Committee chair, and he's a founding member of their Agriculture Committee. His wife is Leanne, and he has sons Mark, David, and Luke, and they were all homeschooled. And he's an environmental consultant for residential.
Yeah, I focus on residential consulting.
Yep, and of course, Red Pill Politics. I don't know if he wants to talk a little bit about that, but his topic tonight is, like you said, something that a lot of people probably haven't heard about, and it's Agenda 21. And thank you again for being the inspiration for the show, and welcome.
Well, thank you guys for having me on, and I was really excited to hear that you took me up on my advice.
How many suckers have you got to do that so far?
A few.
Well, that's good. That's good.
It took a gentleman from out east to do the exact same thing to me several years ago. I was really good at giving advice on how to reach out to people, but never following my own advice, and he called me on it. And I did pretty much the same thing you gentlemen did, is I made a call and checked in with.
But there was no one behind you smacking you in the head as he was suggesting it?
Well, he was strongly urging that I do the same, but there's a vacuum out there of grassroots local information. I'll have to admit, when I scan through the news, I don't scan for news. I scan to see what they're up to. Very rarely do I find their views to be an accurate representation of the political realities that we're actually facing. So I'm very glad that you guys took me up on it, and I wish you a lot of success with your show. And I'm sure if you keep having on different guests and talking about the things that the people care about, I'm sure you will enjoy.
Well, we hope we'll make you proud.
You already have.
Dave, you bring up a great point about things that people care about. Part of what we're doing, it's kind of an educational thing also, because there'll be things that'll be brought out on the show that many folks out there wouldn't necessarily have a good handle on. Or if they do, it's pretty limited. And again, Agenda 21, as we've talked about, this is something that I've had fleeting information on, and I know it has something to do with the UN and so on and so forth. And I have to say this, that when we knew that we'd have you on as a guest, I did a little bit of research on it, and my personal feeling was that, boy, I've dropped the ball by not being totally aware of the consequences of this thing. And perhaps you can share with the viewers your knowledge of this. I'd appreciate that.
I'd love to. You really shouldn't feel bad not being fully aware of this, because it's really a set of policy initiatives that was designed to be elusive. But to go back, just to kind of set a baseline of where this came from and the people that were involved, is prior to 1992, there was initiative by the UN through, they had a summit on development, human developments, and there was already concern about environmental issues. And of course, this was about the time in the 80s and 90s when globalization was a very popular subject, and exactly how that was going to be instituted amongst all the nations. And going back a number of years before 1992 Earth Summit, there was a report that was generated called Our Common Future, and Gro Harlem Brundtland was the author of that, one of the authors. And it basically was the first time that the term sustainable development was brought out and was given a definition. What's important to understand about Gro Brundtland is she was a re-elected Prime Minister in Norway a number of times, so she was pretty popular in Norway. But it's also interesting to note, and it's not by coincidence, as we look more at what Agenda 21 is, her roots as the vice president of the International Socialist Party really just glare through in the policies. They really are underpinned by a philosophy of socialism and collective land use rights. It's land is a collective resource to all the people. So private property rights under these set of policies is considered unsustainable. And later on, I'll touch on a document called the Global Biodiversity Assessment, where they actually list out those things that are unsustainable. So to know what is sustainable, we got to know what is unsustainable. And private property ownership, pastures, you see the hooves of the animals artificially compact the soil, So all those things that are what we take for granted have actually been deemed unsustainable, and it shows up in the documents. So about, like I said, it was actually the 70s and 80s when the environmental part of the UN started to kick into gear. Our Common Future was produced to begin this sustainable development movement. And in 1990, a group called the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives was formed. And they were to be the group that was going to take what came out of the upcoming summit and make it actionable across the globe. They're an international group, and they work in over 178 different countries. And they call themselves now ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. They kind of changed their name as people realized they were taking their environmental pointers from an international group, which is really a blatant violation of Article 10. So,
because they're a non-governmental organization.
Yeah, we cannot contract or create letters of marque with foreign entities. So it's like, although Worcester is a big city, it can't declare war on France, although it would probably win. We simply don't have the right to make those declarations on our own.
So the interesting part there, Dave, and I've heard you speak before on this topic, is Worcester has signed on to the ICLEI.
Yes.
Which technically is a violation of Article 10 of the Constitution of the United States.
To me, when the mayor did that, it was a blatant act of treason, if you ask me. But we should not be contracting with international groups.
Yep. Well, I don't know which year they did it, so we'll have to look back and find out which mayor.
Well, you know, it's something that we can get out of. We've had successes here in the state where we just don't renew our membership with them anymore. And all this group does is they create agreements and contracts with your local municipality or city. And it fits in perfect with the UN's Global to Local initiative. They realized when they didn't get the biodiversity treaty through, they were going to have problems. And one of the people that I consult with on a regular basis was a gentleman that stopped that treaty within 1 hour from being ratified. And because they realized how the bright light of day in the Senate through the ratification process would probably mean the end of their plans. They are that Orwellian. So they've developed a plan to work around legislative approval, which is why Agenda 21 really is a very, very dangerous document in that it does not need legislative approval, it only needs administrative approval. So there's not going to be any Senate ratification as you'd find in a treaty. It was signed into soft law in 1992 during the Earth Summit at the time. George Bush I signed it into soft law, which really just, you know, it doesn't institute it as hard law. It really allows any agency of government, a la carte style, to pick amongst the different initiatives of Agenda 21. Now, this is a 40-chapter document that not only talks about the management of population, the management of land, the management of food. There's an entire chapter on public education, how to make sure that we turn out good global citizens and environmental voters. So there is a chapter that affects almost every aspect of our lives, and it's simply a policy document, and it's turned into enforceable law, oddly enough, right in our communities on town hall floor. At some point, the city of Worcester, either through the consensus process or an actual vote at a city meeting, or the city councilors approved that contract with ICLEI. And subsequently they can get out of it if they like. But these types of agreements are coming in through bureaucracies and agencies of the government, and one of the most notable bureaucracies is the regional planning commissions and the councils of government. Now, these people kind of operate in legal outer space a lot like the Agenda 21 document does. They are governmental, so they're government-like. And if we look at the history here in Massachusetts, I should probably pick up where I left off so this makes sense to your viewers, is 92, signed into soft law. 93, Bill Clinton, under executive order, created the first President's Council on Sustainable Development. This committee was tasked specifically with harmonizing the principles of Agenda 21 into domestic law. So that's where it made the leap from the international realm to being domesticated here in the United States, was through that executive order in the President's Council. And what they came out with is something called Sustainable America. Mm-hmm. That should be familiar to most people, and that's because it was adopted by the APA, the American Planning Association. Now, they provide the textbooks for our college kids taking planning curriculums. They train the lower level planners in the state level, municipal level. So once it became harmonized here domestically, given an American name, it's now trickling down as policy. And we're seeing it show up in a number of different ways.
Just an observation. Everything that you've described, pretty much it sounds nice and warm and fuzzy and green and benign and so on and so forth. After all, who doesn't want the planet to sustain itself and the children to be well educated and so on and so forth? But the devil is in the details with these things. What's the dark side of this?
It shows up in a number of different ways. I think one good example that I think would be timely to talk about, because it will be facing us in the next legislative cycle, is we're looking at a complete rewrite of the state's zoning laws, Chapter 40. And there's a bill that, under its own merits, has not been able to pass literally for decades, portions of this. The bill is called the Comprehensive Land Use Reform and Partnerships Act, CLRPA. And in it, it incorporates many of these policies that you see in Agenda 21. Now, if you go back to the generic description of Agenda 21 or sustainable development, it talks about responsible development that meets the needs of today without compromising the needs of the future. That sounds good, as you said, but the devil is in the details, and we see in CLRPA they're regulating, well, they talk about overriding state and regional interests in your private property. Okay. Now, to me, I mean, I look back at the Fifth Amendment, and it guarantees that an individual will not be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process. Now, due process isn't a consensus meeting that takes place in a hall somewhere. Due process is in a court before a jury of your peers. So a lot of the zoning is based on some very tenuous ground in and of itself, but they're regulating for view. Let's look at how they're using that. They're talking about aesthetic resources. Now, I know a little bit about resources, and I wouldn't necessarily call something that I see and find palatable, or you see and you find palatable, a resource worthy of committing tax dollars to protection. So what I see happening from land trusts, we have got 157 land trusts here in Massachusetts. All right, for every 2 towns, we got 1 land trust. The second highest of all 50 states is Massachusetts. Now, the only way a land trust can get a grant to preserve property, and I'll use a case just to keep it local, right in my own town a couple of years ago, an area land trust came in. They wanted to preserve this farm in perpetuity, and they asked that we sign off on all their endorsements and allow them to move forward with the grant. I really was nervous about this. I said, this really seems backwards to me. Typically, you want to know all the conditions of a contract before you sign it. But we were pressured to move ahead. And I got outvoted. And my commission actually at the time had instructed me to sign off on the endorsement. They went ahead and got their grants. And they only give a grant when a property can be protected through what's called a conservation restriction or a conservation easement. It's really a deed restriction on your deed. And they purchased development rights. Well, they promoted to the town that they wanted to save this farm for the future and get it active again. Yet, when the CR language finally came across my desk, they had banned tractors from farm. Now, I called up the director right away. I asked, is it possible you put Ware's name on someone else's CR? She says, oh, no, that's the cookie cutter one that we use all the time. And I said, well, we got something to talk about here. And I was willing to concede, just to prove that these land trusts were not in it for what they were telling me. I said, I've got a whole long list of restrictions, which I think will make it so you don't have a viable business plan here. But I will concede all these things if you give me one line under exemptions that says all agriculture-related activity would be exempt. I mean, are out here to protect the farm, and I can't think of a better way of giving a healthy regulatory environment than removing those burdens from a farmer to do what farmers do best. And they would absolutely have no part of it. So we're seeing what they mean by preserve and protect is equivalent to ban and eliminate and restrict. And we're seeing this in all of the CRs that go through. They're purchasing up development rights in perpetuity. Now, forever is a very long time to restrict a property from any type of development, access to gravel, sand, stone, things that you would need in other sites to develop even somewhere else. So there really is a lot of different things that we're seeing from a cultural perspective. We're actually seeing the manipulation of our school kids, for example. There's some very bad science that is being promoted, especially with respect to climate change, for example. We're seeing that some of that isn't quite what we were originally told it was.
Now, Dave, I've heard you speak before, and one of the scariest parts of what you were telling me, I believe the term is smart growth areas. Can you talk a little bit about what smart growth means and areas and mean in Agenda 21?
Yeah, well, smart growth is one of the terms that comes along with this whole discussion of sustainability. Quite often, smart growth is more specific to city situations where mixed use. Coming in here to the station today, I saw a development site that says future mixed use coming soon. Now, most areas where
City Square, it's called.
Yeah. Now, I know in where we got a beautiful mill yard, and for years we've been trying to think, what can we do to attract business back into this area? Well, now we're turning it into a mixed-use situation. It's mixed residential and business at the same time. Well, if you look at Clerpa, what's coming down the pike is forced low-income housing at all levels. So that's where you're going to have these little shoebox apartments. Stack 'em and pack 'em housing is what it's kind of called amongst those that are familiar with this. And I would pose the question to the planners, what is this going to do to the cost of insurance, for example? Because they like to put little boutique stores on the bottom, stack them and pack them, low-income housing in the middle, and maybe some offices on top. Now, those businesses that are associated with a smart growth cube, what's going to happen to their insurance premiums? I mean, the chance of fire, for example, of all those people living in there, what are the chances of someone knocking a candle over, leaving a cigarette going? Fire insurance alone will go up. They claim that it's going to be better for our health, that our quality of life will improve under a smart growth situation. Well, when they put a higher concentration of people in an area, not only smog from vehicles or whatever, they're living amongst that lower quality air as far as I'm concerned if you live outside the city boundaries. But it really is lined up to put this low-income housing along areas where the transit, because they've got a transit plan too, and if you trace the progression of how they institute this in cities, you'll see that they'll put a corridor for transit that will go through first. Then they'll start pigeonholing your grant money for smart growth. We get all kinds of smart growth grants to build these structures. And then in the countryside, you see a sustainable development, and the preservationists begin to work.
Now, the thing of it is, this is not just U.S. oriented, this is worldwide.
Yes.
Okay? Are these things actually being implemented on a worldwide, on a global basis at this point?
Yes, they are actually. I subscribe to a service called Google Alerts, and Agenda 21 and ICLEI are two of the things that I monitor. In South Africa, Australia, South America, Canada. Canada's pretty into this. In fact, some of the framers of Agenda 21 are actually from Canada. So it truly is a global plan. However, they have to institute it differently in different places. And the general consensus at this time is that if they can't get America, it's not going to happen. And they have a unique situation here because America, what makes us unique and what makes us a great nation, a lot of people confuse it with the size of our military, and I can assure you it has nothing to do with that. What makes America the greatest nation and a unique nation on this planet is that we have the unique combination of life, liberty, and the right to own property. If you look at socialist nations, their average income per year is $2,000 or $3,000. And this is an inescapable reality to the planners, to the people that are for or against Agenda 21. Have got to realize all wealth is derived from that unique right of property ownership. So you look at a socialist nation, look at East Germany. They went in there, they took their guns first and said that would be the safest thing for everybody. Then they nationalized the land and had government farms. And then the people started to starve in mass numbers. Now the government wound up being the only ones able to generate wealth out of property because they had the ultimate control and the ultimate right of ownership.
Now, we had a guest on several weeks ago who is a Russian by birth, and his premise is that what happened in Russia is really a precursor to what you're talking about right now. It's already been tried, and it fails. So why not do it? It's a beautiful thing. You know, just some notes that I had based on some conversations we've had about this whole Agenda 21 thing, that to me are absolutely repulsive. Number one, it elevates nature above man, period. Secondly, there's a total end to national sovereignty. Third, no more private property. Everything is owned by the state, by, whatever. Even more prohibitive, in my view,
owned by the nanny state, maybe.
Oh, yeah. But also totally restructuring the family unit. And if we had another couple of hours, we could get into that, which is really frightening. You have these human settlement or resettlement zones, the smart growth, which we've talked about, which doesn't sound so smart to me, and you'd be losing your privacy, your independence, and basically all of your rights. Other than that, I see no reason not to go full tilt with this thing. The other thing you mentioned about the students, one of the little snippets that I read is that they view math as being something that's man-made, and the real logic is that everything should be done based on consensus. Basically, it's democracy going wild. In English, mob rule. But other than that, folks, sign on to this and get behind your politicians who think that Agenda 21 is where we should be.
An interesting point that I, took away from hearing you speak previously was, you get these smart growth areas and you stack and pack all these people together in an inner city area, and then something goes wrong, you can say, well, in these smart growth areas, no gun ownership. And in the city, one year, it was several years back, we had a lot of murders with guns, and they did a lot of gun buybacks, and they actually got rid of a lot of their guns. And then there was a lot of problems with knives. And someone proposed that downtown you couldn't have a knife longer than 1 inch long or 2 inches long. And that's the kind of insanity that we see in these cities.
It's a beautiful thing, as they say.
Yep. So now we've got to wrap it up, Ron. Unfortunately.
Again, Activate Worcester. From your perspective, what should people be doing relative to Agenda 21 right now?
Well, they got to keep an eye on what's going on. There is a statewide push by a number of different organizations to get towns to sign on, either to updates to the regional land use plan, the forest legacy, CPA. All these things are related. They got to go to the town meetings and show their own documents.
The other thing I'd suggest that folks do, Google or whatever, Agenda 21. Take a look at, there's tons of information on that, some wonderful videos that you can check out, and I can promise you this, the more you look at it, the more frightened you're going to become. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week, and Dave, thank you for attending.
Thank you for inviting
Love
me
it.
on.